You're speaking specifically with regard to the three.
The
three
64,000
benefits.
particularly.
I wouldn't say that there was a groundswell, but I believe the committee's thought was that we have a very robust, very healthy pension plan. This, I think, is in line with benefits provided elsewhere, and so I think they felt it was fair that if someone had invested this amount of time in public service, that this was an appropriate benefit to provide to a surviving spouse.
Why now? This does send somewhat of a message conflicting with the fact that we broke. So I share Blake's concerns.
Director Buchanan?
Yeah, thank you, Director. As chairman of a multi-employer pension fund, this issue came up years ago in my second job, as you call it. This, I believe, is the right thing to do. Those benefits have been paid for by the participants. And again, that spouse deserves, if that person falls and dies in office, for that small cost that it would take to bump that up over there. I believe that in today's world it's a common practice and becoming more of a common practice to include the spouse if in fact that person dies in office, and to get 50% of that benefit is, in my opinion, is ludicrous. So I speak in favor of the ordinance as presented. Thank you.
Director Melvin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm in agreement with Director Buchanan. I think that this sort of ties out something that we probably should have done a long time ago. And I don't think that experienced, loyal employees in service should suffer because the general population has made some crazy decisions around the state budget. These are people who've got real lives and have really done their part. So I would encourage everybody to vote for this. You know, the fact that we've got the accounting that shows that it's more money is useful, but let's not miss the point. It's about the people who've delivered good service.
Anyone else? Mr. Chairman?
Just a couple of thoughts, and Director Hobson and Director Colson, you know, I quizzed the staff hard on this, but the 26-year-old change is a change that's generally over, and we've seen it from the discussions with respect to Obamacare, the changes in our society when more and more dependents are living in this day and age with their parents, for better or for worse, until the age of 26. So this is what I call a 21st century change. You know, its cost is $3,500. So to me, you know, as someone with children, this is just a change of today's society that most pension plans are adopting. With respect to the 100% rule of 85 benefits to the surviving spouse, I'm very sensitive in the workplace, not only at the law firm which I run, which is one of the only firms of the top 100 firms in terms of size in the country run by women, but we are in a transportation business, and it is, whether I like it or not, a heavily dominant male profession. This is just not the RTA. Our staff is a model for diversity, for gender equalization. But to me, this is an issue that goes to equal pay and equal treatment for women more than anything else. And again, we're in the 21st century. You know, I only have daughters, but to me, this number 3 is very important for female employees in a very male-dominated transportation industry, and for $64,000. And we are very lucky in the fact that you know, you and some of you were on this board, that our pension plan is highly solvent It's probably one of the best funded in the state of Illinois, and as Director Buchanan pointed out, that gives us the flexibility to enact these 21st century changes for what I believe are fairness as well as just realities of the 21st century. And one of the things, and yes, we have lots of needs, but you don't hold everything back, and you don't put everything in abeyance just because we have other issues out there. So, I asked these questions. I drilled our legal counsel Nadine on these hard, and one of the things that I asked Nadine about, I wanted to make sure that all the service boards, because that's primarily who this is, we're just a small part of our pension program, but all of the representatives from the service boards serve on these, on the two committees that she talked about. And, the service boards, have come forward with these kinds of changes that they need. One of the things, and I've spent most of the day with Don Orsino yesterday, is when Metra is competing for employees, they are competing against the Union Pacific, the Burlington Northern Santa Fe, and there is a marketplace out there, and the same would hold true for the CTA, but primarily just spending time with Don yesterday. His marketplace, and he's always worried about losing employees, seasoned veteran employees to the railroads themselves, rather than keeping the finest railroad employees, mechanics and others, including engineers, working for Metra. So that's just my take on it. I'm highly
Mr.
sensitive
Chair?
to these changes, but I just think this is a 21st century change we need.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not part of the committee, okay? So, but if you don't mind.
Sure.
21st century says you don't have pension plans anymore, but put that aside for a second. How much do we spend on our pension plan in total? Not the change, but what's the total cost of the benefit that we provide?
Are you asking about the annual contributions or the expenses of the plan?
Well, why don't you give me both?
The expenses are roughly in the neighborhood of $800,000 per year, roughly. I mean, they vary very much year by year depending on what's going on with the pension. And in terms of the contributions, I think last year's contributions were a little bit over $77 million, but that was kind of an unusual year as we made some supplemental contributions.
So when the actuaries go through and you can't look at this stuff in 1 year increment, right? You got to look at the long term.
Exactly.
So when you look at this over time, how do the actuaries estimate the expense and the contribution requirements?
Well, they recalculate it every year depending upon what the current situation and what the current makeup is of the base, both the retirees and the active participants who are current employees. But these numbers are in line with the average over the years in terms of the expenses. I would say roughly $800,000, and then the supplemental
77 million?
77 million was the contribution, but a lot of that was supplemental. I'm trying to remember what the normal contribution is. Sally, do you remember?
That's RTA. Well, that's all. Consider the total.
This is Sally Dubick-King, our outside counsel for the pension
Okay.
from the law firm of McGuire Woods. So we did make significant supplemental contributions last year. Metro and Pace did, and so did the RTA.
And how many employees does this cover?
We've got approximately 2,200 active participants at this time.
When was the last time we've done an analysis or a strategic review of all of our benefits? Have we done that anytime recently?
Well, each of the agencies provides slightly different benefits, but the RTA conducted a really comprehensive review, I think, about 2 years ago. So we did sort of a market analysis. We had working groups within the agency who reviewed all of those kinds of documents, reviewed benefits provided both in the private sector and in other municipalities in the state. And we feel that what we provide to employees is competitive with what's
With
being
where?
offered out there.
With other public.
With other public entities, yes.
Just, Director Anderson, we are constant.
Just one other thing
Yes, sir.
on this. If we've done an analysis and we're competitive and with our peers, I would say I'd be less inclined to be opposed to the changes you're going to make.
Well, this is one of the things that came out of both that review and requests of the service boards with regard to what they'd like to see happen. You have to understand, again, the RTA's benefits are slightly different than what the other service boards provide. But with regard to the pension, we did have several employees come forth to the pension over several years. I'm using the word request, but some of them were demanding that some of these changes be made.
And we are, and I think Director Hobson and Director Trioti can attest, we talk about with the staff our retirement plan and what's going on all the time. I mean, you and I have had a couple of discussions just in the last few days, not on these particular changes, but I, as the chairman, and I know some of the other members of this board, are constantly drilling the staff with questions with respect to benefits. And I can tell you some of the things that have been requested, I, as well as a couple other folks, have wholesale said no with an exclamation point. So these are minor ones that we bring to you, at this point in time. You should see, Director Anderson, what some of the requests are, which we stop all the time. These are minor ones, again, that I believe 26-year-olds, as well as equality, especially on a gender basis, whether I like public pension plans or not, I inherited the reality when I became chairman of this particular plan. If I started from scratch, this is not how I would go. But I'm just trying to live within the reality and just sleep better at night, Anthony, knowing that we've stopped a lot of other things that are certainly not in this more minor category.
My thing, Mr. Chairman, is, are we competitive? Have we done detailed reviews to ensure that that's the case? And if we have, and this is one of the things that we need to do to continue to be competitive, I think the cost is pretty minor given the kind of cost we incur today. So that's where,
And again, my point is, and you asked the question whether this is vis-a-vis in comparison to other public pension plans. We are competing, at least in the case of Metra. It's a unique animal. We're competing against the private sector, which certainly have richer salaries and benefits generally than we do.
We did feel very strongly that for the cost, this is a benefit that is appropriate to the scale of this particular pension, and it's competitive with what's being offered by other municipal pension plans.
Director Fager?
I come from the private sector of the business, which has no pension plans. So I'm categorically against it, just because we have to take care of ourselves. And I've done that in the past with my 401k, and I think that people have to put money aside for their old age, period.
Mr. Chairman, I hear you, because I'm a private sector guy as well, and the trend is the elimination of these kind of benefits, right? So in the private sector, because the cost of these things are so high and not practical to fund it, they've been going away, and benefits have been redesigned to do other things other than provide pension benefits. But the distinction here is the public sector doesn't do it. And right now, they're still using benefit plans. And one day the public sector will get to the point where they'll have to address this issue. But in the meantime, we just got to stay competitive. And if we're doing the right things about studying the markets, studying the benefits and the like, then I think for now we're kind of stuck with being competitive within the sector that we're in. I guess that's how I rationalize it in my mind. Otherwise, I'd be saying we ought to be doing a different type of study. But for now, that's just not practical. So.
To your point, Director Anderson, there are options available to the private sector that are no longer legally available to municipalities. So this is what we have.
Director Buchanan?
Yeah, thank you, Dirk. One question I'd like to clear up in my mind. The 2,200 employees of the RTA, at the end of a year, what is the figure? How many people would be affected by this dying early and still in office?
Well, I
we
think that's
talking about a
the
handful?
overall point. The reason the cost is so low is because it's a very, very delimited and
That's
very
correct.
narrow and specific
You know,
group of people. Parents
again,
of
this
young
is-
children who are old enough to be Rule of 85 vested is a very, very tiny
I always
group.
thought in our world it was time to raise up benefits, make sure our people get something better. And here we're discussing something here that, boy, I tell you what, I'm just amazed that everybody's worried about the cost. God, I mean, that's just me, so.
It does cover a very narrow group of
Do
people.
we have a motion and a second, or is there more discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I would like, if possible, to split these and vote on all four separately.
That will require a motion and a second. Is there a second? If not, motion dies. Is there a motion to approve the amendments as presented? So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded.
I'm sorry, who moved and seconded?
Director Fuentes moved, Director Melvin seconded. Roll call, please.
Director Buchanan?
Aye.
Director Hobson?
No.
Director Frega?
No,
Director Fuentes?
Aye.
Director Melvin?
Aye.
Director Totten? Director Troyani?
Aye.
5 ayes, 2 nays, and 1 absent. Motion carries.
If there's no other business before this committee, is there a motion and a second to adjourn? Moved by
So moved.
Director Melvin, seconded by Director Fuentes. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Meeting adjourned. Thank you.